We're now on 10:30, so I'm going to get going. I'm sure we'll have more individuals joining us as we start the session. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, fellow leaders from wherever you're dialing in and joining us from today. I'm delighted to join you today to discuss well-being and well-being when we look at the hybrid future of work, which is becoming our new reality and our new norm. And I thought it was a really appropriate topic, particularly as we are now for the first time having a hybrid me-to-we. So I thought this was a really great opportunity to kind of share some of the data, some of the findings that we've got, and then of course contextualize that to our world and our environments. Before I get going, I'm just going to make sure I can share my screen. So I'll just do that. And I'm just going to play from start. Marina, I can see you. Can you give me a thumbs up that that's all good? Brilliant. Okay. Thank you very much. So as well as being an Exponents alum, hello fellow Exponents, whoever's out there, I'm also a Chief Behavioural Officer for Development Beyond Learning. For those of you who are not familiar with Development Beyond Learning, we provide live and virtual training and development for the future workforce. We are backed by behavioural science and we use first-class trainers with an unparalleled heritage in talent development. So we work globally with a lot of leading multinational companies, and we support them on specific development culture transformation programs. We're proudly an Australian business, but we're now global. We've got offices in London, Singapore, and Sydney, and our programs are reached throughout the world. And 2020 and 2021 was a massive year for us during the pandemic. Not only did we have to pivot a lot of our training and development to 100% virtual, just as we all know it with our lead work, but as a result of that, we actually developed over 130,000 people who are based across graduates, new managers, anybody moving into career transition. We supported companies to allow that with their employees. We're very privileged and humbled by being acknowledged around the world with several awards that my wonderful team does and supports us in getting that. And then today, what we're going to be focusing on is well-being, and why well-being matters when we look at ourselves, when we look at our teams, when we look at how we are operating our businesses, particularly as we move into more flexi working and more hybrid environments of working. We have done some research and quite a number of research, which I look forward to sharing with you all some data. Be prepared. There's a fair bit of kind of high-level data points that's really just putting the science behind why well-being is really important for us and how we think about that to help support productivity and to support general well-being of our people. And then, of course, I've got a fantastic panel discussion joining me. A lot of you may know some of these individuals are all part of our Stanford community, our lead community. Inbal, Kevin, and Alan are joining me and are going to bring some really fantastic perspectives and help contextualize the research and the data to kind of how we can see that play out in our environments and how they have seen it through their observations of their specialized work. And then, of course, I'll wrap up with some basic strategies for supporting well-being to move forward. So with that, let's get going. And I think that the great segue of talking about happiness in the first session is linking very much to the well-being piece. And when we look at well-being and the meaning of well-being, it's the state of being comfortable, healthy, or happy is really what we're talking about here. So it's actually how we all are considering our state of being. First of all, why does that matter? And how does supporting workforce well-being support the bottom line? High levels of well-being are positively correlated with the human and business measures that we would want to see increase, and negatively correlates with those that we would wish to see decrease. As with diversity and inclusion, the business case for supporting well-being is the definition of a no-brainer. It improves organizational and individual performance and health, and positive well-being is also highly correlated with a positive experience of belonging. And we know that organizations that deliberately support their employees in both these areas will rightly reap the rewards. When we look at a sustainable competitive advantage for wellbeing, high psychological wellbeing levels can show results in various ways, including higher levels of commitment, better morale, improved productivity, greater customer satisfaction, and of course the increased attractiveness to new recruits that you're looking for to bring more talent into your workforce. And when we think about that in the sense of what happens if we don't consider wellbeing, it can cause some quite dramatic impacts to our bottom line, the business case of why we would consider that. And the global economy is estimating that we lose about 1 trillion per year in productivity due to depression and anxiety, and a figure that's dramatically being expected to rise going into 2030. So successful corporations of the future not only will generate profits, but also will generate thriving employees who are capable of weathering crises. This came from a Gallup survey in 2021, and I thought that was really important kind of statement to make when we're thinking about future business strategy and how we're thinking about our businesses moving forward. So let's dive into the research. And my team at Development Beyond Learning conducted some research. We wanted to get under the skin, particularly throughout the last 2 years, and understand, well, what shifts and changes are we starting to see and feel from ourselves, first of all, but then, of course, our employees, our teams. And how do we start to use that data to then understand how we better support our people when we are looking to have thriving organizations? The research that we conducted was combination of hundreds of hours of desk research. We did survey polling. We also polled over 1,000 senior executives, talent, HR, learning and development leaders, people who are responsible for culture transformation, people development, and really trying to understand how they were feeling and how they were seeing this. And that was spanning across the US, UK, Southeast Asia, and Australia. The survey and the research was conducted between August 2020 to May of 2021, and the results culminated into a white paper that is available, and that's available complimentary for you all to download at any time this week. I'll make sure I provide that link for you all, and you can absolutely use that to influence and perhaps have some really powerful conversations internally with your leaders and colleagues. The research methodology is briefly outlined here. We took the measurement on 3 main techniques: the evaluative approach, the endemonic approach, and the experience approach. And you can find more information about that in the research paper. And so when we look at the wellbeing challenge, what we wanted to identify is, first, what are business leaders and employees rating themselves? How are they feeling about their wellbeing? And it's becoming a top concern. Now, what we're starting to find out is some regions around the globe are navigating out of the pandemic. We've got some regions still navigating complete isolation and lockdown. We've got flexi working happening. We have hybrid working happening. We are now starting to feel and see the true impact of our employees 2 years on. And the employee wellbeing has gained increased organizational focus and prioritization over the last decade. At the same time, there has been a reported decrease in the lived experience of wellbeing globally. So when we look at how we are, Gallup's State of the Global Workplace 2021 report shows that negative emotions such as worry, stress, anger, sadness reached record levels for employees during the pandemic. We are even coming out of the pandemic and looking at the recent additional complexities in our world, the unfortunate crisis and civilian concern we've got in the Ukraine. We have unrest happening in Hong Kong. We've got flooding that's happened in Australia. We've got global warming challenges. We're already noticing that even coming out of a non-pandemic hybrid world, we are really struggling with the new challenges that the world is bringing to us as well. And this is resulting to how our employees are suffering, how they're not thriving, and then, of course, how are they disengaging in their work and in their placement in society. When we look at how we feel during the pandemic, depression rates have doubled in the UK and tripled in the US. And whilst COVID-19 clearly has been a devastating impact on our wellbeing levels, we've already been well aware that we've been on a downward trajectory for the last decade. So this is something that has just been exacerbated and has now increased and accelerated twofold with that. And there's never really, the key message here when we look at wellbeing in ourselves and with our teams is that there's never been a more pertinent time to talk about it. We need to talk about it. We need to address it and not have stigma around it. And then we need to identify how we build capabilities for our people to know how to navigate it as well. So when we conducted our research revealed the impact of COVID-19 on wellbeing levels has not been a democratic one. We know this, we're feeling this in all parts of our world, and particularly as a global lead community, we are sharing those stories constantly. There's certain groups that we identified are particularly vulnerable to be depleted, and our findings had uncovered 3 wellbeing gap groups. The first one was the led versus the leaders, where the led were actually having more depleted wellbeing gaps and a risk of increasing that. The second was women versus men, with women having, again, depleted wellbeing gaps compared to men, and early career versus established talent. This is talking about our future workforce. This is talking about people who we're bringing in from having a world of education coming into the world of work, and we're helping them transition into their careers. Myriad factors play into these wellbeing gaps, including levels of autonomy, resource, and confidence, as well as, more importantly, the opportunities for connection, which is, of course, our theme at this year's Meet a We. All of which these employers will need to navigate as we transition to the hybrid future of work. It's important when we look at these global wellbeing groups that micro groups can be uncovered, such as social inequality. For example, when we look at women versus men, we are identifying that there might be more racial inequality contributing factor to depleted wellbeing in certain regions around the world. So these groups are kind of then unraveling almost micro groups under that and how that's being impacted across different regions, different industries, and different environments as well. So let's dive into a little bit of the data. I want to share some research with you. I want to bring a little bit of science behind why this matters, and then I'll be inviting the panel to come through. So when we look at the led versus the leaders, employees 18% less likely than business leaders to agree they feel satisfied, and are 24% less likely to agree that things they do are worthwhile, 14% more likely to disagree with the statement. And interestingly, business leaders perceive employees' well-being to be better than it is, suggesting there is a perception gap as well as a lived experience gap. Now, we could challenge that this contributing factor is also playing into this great resignation, or the need for change that we're starting to see people have now, this need of just having control of something and moving on. And that's where that great resignation idea is starting to play out a bit more significantly. Business leaders perceive employees' well-being to be better than it is. While the majority of business leaders perceive their employees' current levels of well-being as good or very good at 71%, employees themselves rated their own well-being levels significantly lower, with twice the number of employees rating their well-being as poor, 10%, versus the employer perception at 5%. A sense of autonomy is highly beneficial to wellbeing levels and is one of the 3 core psychological needs common to all humans. It is therefore unsurprising that those with more autonomy in their roles at work, those involved in key decision-making, and those better able to control their diaries have experienced greater wellbeing through the pandemic and working from home with those with less autonomy. There's also been much discussion around the impact of socioeconomic status on individuals, the ability to weather the wellbeing threat posed by COVID. And as the Mental Health Foundation puts it, we're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. Wealth and status are shown to be key factors in wellbeing levels. For instance, groups affected by socioeconomic inequalities were more likely to experience anxiety, panic, hopelessness, loneliness, and to report not coping well with the stress of the pandemic. This widely evident social disparity in mental health means that even before the pandemic, those financially less well off were also likely to have poorer well-being. Much of the wellbeing discrepancy identified in our research is likely to depend on the level of resources available to the individual to help them weather the proverbial storm. As the Mental Health Foundation quoted in 2020, depending on the size of our boat and the navigation equipment at hand, we will be able to cope better or worse with the waves. For example, business leaders and more established talent are likely to have access to larger, more comfortable homes than those just starting out in their careers. Research reveals that those on higher incomes have been less impacted by the pandemic financially. Thus, having less means suffering more, both economically and intuitively from a wellbeing perspective. So what does this mean when we look at future considerations for it? Beyond the immediate impact of the pandemic, research suggests that the longer-term emotional fallout of COVID-19 will be a broader state of languishing. Coined by sociologist Corey Keyes and identified as the enemy of well-being, languishing is a joyless, aimless sense of stagnation, which dulls your motivation, disrupts your ability to focus, and triples the odds that you'll cut back on work. With factors such as autonomy, higher income, and status giving business leaders more protection from external threats to our societal well-being, companies should be alert to the risk of languishing state amongst their employee ranks as we look ahead to well-being watch-outs in the future of work. Further watch-outs for employee well-being in the hybrid future of work include the potential mismatch in expectations from the led versus leader and what hybrid models could look like. There's some data coming out where employers are anticipating a 60-40 blend of 60 on-site, 40 remote versus the ideal employee blend of roughly 60-40 the other way. So there's disparity coming through between the led and the leaders on their expectations and what they would like to do from that. Moving on, let's talk about the next wellbeing gap, which is the women versus the men. Across the entire survey population, a discrepancy between the experienced well-being of men and women was found, such that men were 13% more likely than women to rate their own well-being as good. The UK government has recently concluded from their own Spotlight research series, which tracks population mental health and well-being during the pandemic, that there is an underlying relationship between gender and the impact of COVID-19 on well-being. The disparity in well-being between men and women is also seen at the business leader level, suggesting that seniority does not protect from the impact to well-being felt as a result of gender. Female business leaders were 12% less likely than their male counterparts to report feelings of happiness and 10% less likely to agree they felt satisfied with their life nowadays. And the relatively large gap of experienced well-being between men and women, and the fact that this is not mitigated by seniority, indicates that something specifically attributable to gender is at play in the current context. We know that women's well-being was hit harder by the impact of the pandemic than men. Women suffered 90% more anxiety than men, and globally, working women reported being 27% less able to prioritize their well-being than men, due to the strains put on them by the pandemic. More than half, 54%, believe their male colleagues have been less impacted by the pandemic. And there is also an interesting age dynamic to the wellbeing gender gap. Women are generally found to be more likely to experience common mental health problems than men, and rates are on the rise. But this is especially prevalent with young women and young women coming into the professional workforce. In the UK, we had 26% of 16 to 24-year-old women diagnosed with symptoms of common disorders such as anxiety and depression, versus just 9.1% of men aged 16 to 24. And in the workplace, our own research has identified two striking disparities in female wellbeing during the pandemic. It's the perceived capability and perceived autonomy levels. Our research found a gap between men and women across all respondents. In the perception of the quality of their own performance during the pandemic, men were 14% more likely to believe their performance had improved than women were. Thinking about why this might be, we know that imposter syndrome, first posited by psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes, causes women, despite outstanding academic and professional accomplishments, persist in believing that they are not really bright and have fooled anyone who thinks otherwise. We hear this imposter syndrome a lot. In fact, we've got the lovely Monica speaking about this straight after me, and the likes of Sheryl Sandberg, Michelle Obama, Charlize Theron, and even Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor have all confessed to experiencing imposter syndrome. Lynn Perry-Whittam suggests that imposter syndrome could be one of the factors contributing to a she-cession in which we see women being left behind in the workforce due to COVID-19. And there's been much debate in recent years around imposter syndrome being something experienced more by women versus universally. And we know the global average for those who experience imposter syndrome, regardless of gender, is around 62%. For example, in Singapore, workers of all genders are more likely to experience imposter syndrome than those in other countries. But in many countries, the statistics demonstrate that women are more prone to this pattern of thought. And for example, in the UK, 90% of the women surveyed express that they feel incompetent at work. Imposter syndrome is more common when facing new challenges or being out of comfort zone, because factors such as stress and ambiguity and isolation feed those pre-existing self-doubt. So given the pandemic was there for a context which would have exacerbated imposter syndrome, it is perhaps unsurprising that we see women displaying less confidence than men as we emerge from this period.
Andrea, there are a number of questions in the chat. Would you like to take those while they're coming up, or would you like to take them at the end, or
I'd like to take them at the end if that's okay, because I think the panel will also be able to help with some of those questions.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So moving forward, our research also revealed, I'm kind of conscious, team, that there's quite a bit of data here, so I want to make sure I share this with you as well to really help our conversation and contextualize. Our research also revealed a gender gap and a perceived autonomy, which could impact the disparity experienced in wellbeing between men and women. Our research revealed men were 14% more likely than women to believe they had as much or more autonomy at work as before the pandemic. Now, autonomy is a core psychological need, and it seems probable that women may experience less autonomy than men when working from home in a hybrid context. We know statistically women who already shoulder a higher proportion of caring responsibilities than men, from unpaid domestic labour, childcare responsibilities to mental load. A pre-pandemic survey by the ONS, which was found in the UK, that women have on average 5 fewer hours per week in leisure time than men due to household chores. And during the pandemic, researchers from Boston Consulting Group surveyed more than 3,000 people in the US and Europe and found that working women are now spending an average of 15 hours a week more than men on unpaid domestic labour. Again, it's perhaps unsurprising that women should feel a diminished sense of autonomy over their time compared to men, that they would feel less able to benefit from the potential enhanced autonomy afforded by working from home, that this plays out detrimentally in their overall sense of well-being, and that it has been exacerbated by the pandemic and additional home life demands. And importantly, this pattern is occurring regardless of seniority and income. And research by scientists from the universities of Oxford, Cambridge and Zurich showed that working women in the UK, Germany and US are doing more childcare and homeschooling across all wage brackets during the pandemic compared to men with similar earnings. And this is congruent with our findings that the gender gap in wellbeing plays out across both employees and business leaders. A lot to unpack when we look at this gender piece. So on the one hand, cons of wellbeing and hybrid future of work for women and men. The increased flexibility is likely to come with hybrid working models, and it's projected to enhance women's wellbeing as it helps relieve the stress trying to balance work and home. And some of you out there might be feeling that. You might find it a little bit easier when you're home. You can manage and juggle a few of the house chores while jumping on an email, jumping on a call, getting through that. For everyone, if we implement well, hybrid working has the potential to offer enormous advantages for our collective well-being. However, there is a growing number of experts from Columbia University to the Harvard Business Review to The Economist to the Financial Times who have expressed concern that hybrid working environments may magnify the gender gap and negatively impact women. And it seems likely that a hybrid future will see women occupying less office time than men as they seek to balance their greater share of childcare demands. More women, around 65% than men at 55%, would prefer the fluidity of an office they could drop into anytime. Whereas for more men, at 32% than women, 26%, would prefer to have set days when the whole company has to be in the office each week. So research further shows it is important for women to be physically present in order to be heard than for men. With 45% of female business leaders reporting that it's difficult for women to speak up in virtual meetings, and 1 in 5 women say she has been overlooked or ignored by colleagues in video calls. If projections are accurate and there are fewer women in offices in the future, they're likely to suffer from being outnumbered by men in the office. Stereotypes are more easily applied when difference is more noticeable, and it is when one group becomes less common and more other, which comes out of this inclusion and diversity conversation that we constantly have. The lack of women may also alienate the female employees who do choose to return to the physical office, further exacerbating the situation and creating a vicious circle that makes it more difficult for women to return and thrive. And the last point there, 7 out of 10 women who said they experienced adverse changes to their daily routines during the pandemic believe these shifts have prevented or will now prevent them from progressing professionally. I'm just going to quickly cover the third gap, which is the early careers versus established, and then I'm going to invite my panel to join us and we'll answer some questions. Our research shows when we look at early career talent, this is anyone coming into the workforce in their first 5 years of their professional career, that a small majority of 18 to 24-year-olds feel hopeful, around 28%. And around 34% feel very discouraged or concerned about 2021 to 2022. In looking at reasons behind this, this is clear that this demographic went into the pandemic on the back foot. There's been greater feelings of loneliness. We have a higher proportion believe their own future will be worse as a result, and more have reported suicidal thoughts or deliberately hurting themselves. They're feeling less able to cope with stress of the pandemic and more being worried about the future. And what we're finding is that we've now got students coming into the workforce in the coming year who haven't even set foot on campus. They haven't been able to in a majority of their degree or their studies. So they're actually even more on the back foot when it comes to building some of those interpersonal work readiness skills that we expect when they come into the workforce. So the wellbeing already is an issue for young people even before the COVID pandemic. 80% of those studying in higher education reported symptoms of stress or anxiety. And so what we're finding is that this generation is starting out their careers on the back foot when it comes to wellbeing, at a time when society's long-term wellbeing has been universally dampened and working in a hybrid context, while beneficial in many ways, throws up its own inherent challenges in respect of wellbeing. Super important when we think as leaders about how we're supporting our teams and how we're supporting the various generations coming through our workforce. And so when we look at kind of new starters, they have a slightly greater need for the emotional support than established talent, and a much greater need for support in building relationships than established talent. And the future workforce segment also rated building relationships as their top challenge. That connection, the ability to do that, versus established employees who have had experience in doing that, have got more confidence and have got the resources to also allow that to happen as well. So these statistics really speak to that challenge for new starters of building connections and relationships from scratch in a hybrid context. What was interesting, although probably unsurprising from our research, is that early career employees haven't enjoyed the same confidence levels in terms of their performance. It's a disparity of about 8% from remote working that established talent have. And findings from PricewaterhouseCoopers supports this. The most inexperienced employees need the office the most. Respondents with the least amount of professional experience in that first 5 years were found to feel less productive while working remotely than the more experienced colleagues at 34% versus 23%. And additionally, they were found to more highly value meetings with managers and company training programs, which if you all recall when you were going through your first 5 years of your career, that on-the-job experience, the mentorship you have, the water cooler corridor conversations you have, those are significantly important as you're navigating your first career and transitioning into your career. And our research revealed that early career respondents also felt less autonomous when working remotely than more established talent. This is unsurprising when we consider their comparative lack of experience, their more junior and less autonomous positions, and the difficult transition from education to the world of work, which research shows is one of the toughest transitions we ever make. This is now made even harder by uncertainty created by the pandemic and how we're now considering hybrid working environments. So hybrid working risks putting early career talent at future disadvantage, with 18 to 24-year-olds less likely to be well set up for comfortable remote working. Many live with parents or in flat shares, and those trying to work from houses or flats or multiple occupations are among those at greater risk in relation to their wellbeing during the pandemic. And in the UK, the CIPD has warned of an inequalities gap emerging between those who have the space to work comfortably from home versus those who don't. And then, of course, the research from PricewaterhouseCoopers found that 30% of those in the first 5 years of the career would prefer to work remotely for only 1 day per week versus just 20% of all respondents. Findings from TimeWise support this, with 89% of early career talent reportedly having difficulties working from home due to COVID. Right. There's a lot to unpack there. And I've shared a high level kind of data point coming through of what's coming out of those wellbeing groups, and then of course what will be unraveling through that. I am delighted to invite to join me in a panel discussion is 3 exceptional speakers who a lot of you may know. We have Inbal Demri-Shaham. Many of you may know her. She's been at Stanford since 2008, provides executive coaching, program development, and group facilitation. She holds a BA in psychology and education, a master's in organizational behavior, and a PhD in organizational systems, and a certified coach. Kevin, fantastic to have you join us. Recently left LinkedIn as global sales readiness leader to found his own career skills invest business. He earned a doctorate from the University of Southern California, where he focused on the future of work and skills gap, and has an MBA at Stanford Graduate School of Business and resides in Austin, Texas. And then, of course, finally, we have Alain Lambert, who is experienced international HR professional and a fellow of the Institute of Leadership and Management. Currently leading the manager coach work streams of Total Energy, which is a people, ambition and company project, a global scope across 150 countries, more than 1,000 managers. He is also an alumni of the Groundbreakers cohort and resides in France. So we've got a fantastic global panel coming through today. I'm going to stop sharing so that I can make sure we can see you all, and we can start the questions. One moment. Okay, great. Can I see you? So I think we've got quite a few questions coming in the chat, and I will pause to ask maybe 1 or 2 from there if we can. But before we do, I want to jump in and ask all of the panel, when we're thinking about the woman versus men situation, that gap that we're starting to identify, I'd love to know, what are your insights and observations on women's well-being during the pandemic or these current times? So how are you starting to see that? And when looking at the increased wellbeing gap for women, what opportunities do you believe organizations have in addressing this? And what can we do as an executives to support gender wellbeing? Inbal, can I invite you to go first?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you, Angela, for the phenomenal presentation. And I saw some comments in the chat as you were talking about the relevance of data. And I just want to say, we're learning to fly the plane as it's being built. So constant, and this is actually one of my tips for executives, right? Constant data collection and data analysis and response. It's a must during these times. And we have some data that we can speak to, but honestly, it's still coming out. We're still figuring it out. And I think, in my experience, in my work over the last couple of years, especially, I think it's really important as you look at this data to look at the nuances, because what is true for women of color in the pandemic is different from what is true for white women, for women who are immigrants, for Hispanic women, Asian women. And so those nuances make a big, big difference in terms of the impact on women of on their women's well-being. Sorry, I was running numbers in my head as I was trying to actually utter words. And so I think those nuances are really important. Broad picture, women have always been the ones attending to everyone else's well-being, often at the cost of attending to their own well-being. And this is true now as well. And this is true for women who are, front-level employees, women who are middle managers, women who are directors, and even women who are VPs. They disproportionately spend more time compared to men in the same level in the organization on attending to the well-being of those who are reporting to him through check-ins, to literally asking them, how are you doing? Checking in on their well-being, helping them manage work-life balances and making sure that they're not overworked. And so this kind of paints a picture of the playing field is not just still not even, it's also further tilted. And so there's no surprise, I guess, that women are the rate of burnout in women is double that of men, again, looking at the same levels in the organizations. In terms of what organizations can do and what we can do, knowing this, acknowledge in tangible ways this added work that women are doing. It's true, by the way, for women supporting other women and women of color. Women are still doing most of that work. Even when it's celebrated in some ways, it doesn't necessarily translate to work opportunities, to promotions, to pay, or to additional support, giving someone more headcount so they can actually attend to what needs to be attended to at this time. At this time is an important aspect.
Thanks, Inbal. Really great points and message there. Kevin, can I invite you to share any perspectives from your end?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, look, I mean, most of us have seen similar data that you shared, Angela, and obviously, Inbal's point is a great one, that the data is still evolving, and I've always been a big believer that the best thing we can do with us is within our organizations, within our companies, is really get that drumbeat going on. We need to be better listeners. I'm a man, obviously. Men have a very prominent role to play in having the pulse of however their organization is made up. So, there's allyship has been thrown around a lot, especially here in the US over the past 2 years. And I think that's a term that you don't give yourself. It's something that you have to be earned. So you should aspire to be being called an effective ally, we as men, for women in your organization and in your industry for that matter. And the best way to do that is to ask yourself, what am I doing inside this company, inside this organization, to continuously beat the drum, not just when the spotlight is on, and not just when a global operating priority says, hey, we want morale to tick up 10 points on X, but sparring that conversation, encouraging people to contribute every day to pushing these agendas along, and listening. Always be listening. ABL is basically a point of view that has really stood the test of time. A lot of these issues, as we know, previously existed. There were gaps that existed prior to COVID. COVID just kind of blew a lot of this up and expanded these gaps. So a lot of this isn't new, but I think, look, we've got to grow new muscles. Every company has to grow some new developmental areas. I think that I'll end on this point. I think the messy middle in terms of how organizations are structured is always where the biggest change and the biggest opportunity lies, right? So you've got people that are hired on the down here. You've got folks in the C-suite who say, hey, we want to go in this direction. But unless that manager through VP, unless those folks are really beating this drum, initiatives are going to stall. People are not going to have as high of a sense of belonging as they could. And I think that's a travesty. It's a real missed opportunity. So I think you focus in the middle, and I think it's every organization, every company has to have this identity question answered. And it's a journey, right? I mean, none of this happens overnight.
Yeah, fantastic insights. Thank you, Kevin. Alan, I'd love to get your perspective in the area that you're working from as well.
Angela, thanks. By the way, it's Alan. I'm just English. I'm not French.
I wanted to make you French.
Everyone does, because I work in France. Yeah, thank you so much for having me with you all today. I want to bound back on something that Inbal just said, in fact, and it really touched the point, I think, when she was saying about the female talent and people perhaps taking so many caring roles that they're looking after everyone else at every single level. And one of the key things that we learned as an organization, and my focus was actually on managers rather than females, because we saw that the focus was actually on our middle management. As Kevin said, it's the middle, which is the real sticking point. But the thing which we really had to hammer home to everybody was look after yourself first. And one of the core values of our organization is safety. So we use the image of getting on board a plane and going through that safety procedure of listening to, make sure you buckle up and all the rest of it. But if the oxygen mask pops down, then put yours on first. And that for us was something which we really needed to say to people, because people were feeling that there was so much going on mid-pandemic crisis, that they were firefighting left, right, and centre with their people, with their teams, with their families, with the people they care for outside of work, with people that they were being pulled in every direction, and people were forgetting to put themselves first. So whether we're talking about female talent, young talent, managers, whoever it is, I think we all need to just start with ourselves when it comes to well-being, and make sure that we put our own oxygen mask on before we try to help others and put their oxygen mask on, because we need to be in a position to support other people in their well-being. So you need to start with yourself. That's what I wanted to pick up on what Inbal said. So I know you've got plenty of other questions, Angela, so I won't hog the airspace.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alan. And I really resonate with that comment as well. I think as a leader, navigating a global business through a pandemic, I think if your own well-being is not there first and foremost, how can you help anyone else in your team? So I very much resonate with that 100%. Thank you. I'd like to invite anyone from the panel in terms of the projections around the gender gap potentially becoming greater in this hybrid context, this kind of idea of flexi working moving forward. What are your insights and observations on this as a concern? Is there anything you're wanting to flag or share in what you're having discussions with in your respective work, or what you're hearing? And Bill, is that something you might want to provide?
I was trying to be polite because I went first. Alan and Kevin, do you want to chime in first?
No, go for it, Inbal. Ladies first.
I'm happy to give my thoughts here, if you don't mind, Angela.
Thanks, Kevin. Go ahead.
Yeah. Look, I think if the question is, most organizations, most companies are going to have some type of hybrid model on how they go to market, how they conduct their business. And as a result of that, it's really a no-win situation for women, people of color, et cetera, et cetera. I think that means that there's an opportunity to create a couple of new pathways and a few new motions. I mean, there has to be a way where, we're in a great reset, essentially, right? So every company has to essentially have a conversation and challenge a bunch of assumptions. Like, I don't think, we even at LinkedIn, we had a certain point of view on, everyone sees onboarding numbers, and we all know that in-person experiences in terms of establishing connections result in a certain degree of churn, and a certain number, a certain projection of people with job satisfaction, certain promotion levels. And the idea that once you take that away or you modify it, that it's going to tank, I think that has to be rethought. And that takes work, it takes effort, right? It takes forcing a conversation and this. So I feel pretty strongly about that.
And I can build on what Kevin just said, because I think the solutions need to be systemic, because the problems are systemic. And if you look at one of the sources of stress on women, specifically on mothers, actually during the pandemic, it was that the entire support system that working mothers had at their disposal was just gone overnight, right? And so while I think it was about a year ago, last time I checked the numbers, 1 in 4 women was considering either downshifting or leaving the workforce altogether. Now it's 1 in 3. So things are not getting better, they're getting worse. I remember 3 years ago, the number of years it would have taken to close the gender gap at work and economic achievement gap was, I think, close to 260 years. We don't have a number, updated number, based on what's happening now during the pandemic. So there are some good signs of progress in terms of women being promoted into more leadership role. It's very incremental. And when you compare it to the costs to women of the pandemic, I don't have the numbers yet, but I doubt they're good.
Yes, important point. Thank you, Alan. Sorry, I want to keep wanting to say Alan. Alan, do you want to add any final points to that?
No, I think Kevin's made some really valid points on the topic already, and in honesty, I'm happy to move to the next question. I don't think other than what Kevin said.
Fantastic. I think there's been some really great perspectives shared. So, Ella, I'm going to take this question to you first then. And you know, there has been many conversations. There's evidence starting to come out around the Great Resignation that's starting to be felt around the globe and through certain periods and certain industries. What future of work strategies are being considered or you believe should be considered when we think about employee well-being, when we think about their levels of need of autonomy, and of course that helps build their security on remaining happy in their and fulfilled in their roles? What's your perspectives and strategies on that?
Yeah, thanks. Well, first of all, the Great Resignation, I see this in media all over the place, particularly in consultants like PwC and Deloitte and all these people who are all talking about the Great Resignation. My own industry, I don't see it, is the first thing, and this maybe something which is purely linked to my company, and maybe something that's geographic because I'm in France and the labour market is not as dynamic as other places. But I don't see the Great Resignation. What I do see, however, is an absolute fundamental change in the way that we're going to be working, a complete rug pull from underneath the senior management team as to what their expectations are in terms of the employee-employer relationship, and in terms of the level of support and accompaniment that the managers need to provide to their staff on a day-to-day basis. So for me, it's not so much as resignation, it's more about the social contract of how we do our work and the way in which we're going to deliver, albeit for the same employer when it comes to us. And the things that I think stand out the most, first of all, is a sense of meaning and purpose, and it's the forced isolation that we all had during the pandemic has caused us all to perhaps sort of retreat a little bit and think about why we're doing it, what's the purpose in our life. And it's given people some real fundamental questions as to, do they really want to be doing what they're doing on a day-to-day basis? And I think some people have come out of it going, yeah, I really do. I truly believe in what I'm doing. And some people have come out on total opposite, kind of question marks over why they're spending so much of their time doing it. And that may be perhaps the Great Resignation that you're talking about. I haven't seen it with my population. So the sense of meaning, purpose, and role in life, I think, is important. The need to recognize the whole person, so that the fact that you're coming to work now, everyone's, you've got my spare bedroom behind you on the screen of today. Everyone's seen well into people's lives. You've suddenly learned about their children because you can hear them in the background. You know they've got a cat or a dog because you've seen it walking the screen. I think there's a barrier which has always been in the workplace about, you bring yourself to work and then you go home and you have your private life. And that barrier has artificially been taken away. And in my personal view is that's a good thing. We're now bringing our whole self to work, and managers are able to recognize you for who you are and the personal needs that you have, rather than just seeing you as a number on a payroll sheet. For me, I think that's a really positive outcome, and something we absolutely need to keep, is that recognition of the overall emotional well-being of an employee and their holistic self. And then the third factor, I think, is autonomy. You mentioned it already, Angela. But autonomy is something that we were all thrust upon when we all went remote. We all suddenly had no manager sitting next to us. We suddenly had the team which wasn't with us. and we needed to be in a situation where we could confidently go about doing our work, that we were motivated to do it, and that we made sure that we had the skills and information available to us to do it. So for me, those are the three things I think that we see going forward in terms of future of work for us is really making sure that we all have a sense of meaning, that we focus on self, and that we are able autonomously to do our job, which is essentially working on motivation on one side and on making sure that we're skilled on the other. So upskilling, reskilling, learning, all that piece comes out of that.
Angela, may I add a comment? So I started my previous comment in, this is a systemic issue. It needs a systemic solution or systemic solutions. And to your point, Alan, and your point, Kevin, about the big reset, or whether it's resignation or not, as you think about this reset, I think it's really critical to also notice who are the people at the table who are making decisions about what the future will look like. So as things reset and there are new models for how things will be done, who are the people who get a voice in that conversation? And is everybody really represented? To Kevin's point about this is the future of work doesn't seem good for people of minority groups. The only way to change that is to have them at the table when those decisions are being made. And this is actually a concern that I have, that it's not happening.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Inbal, and to bounce back on that, that's exactly what we've done. So when we've looked at coming out of lockdown, going back to the workplace, we've really made it a listening exercise on a proximity basis by the line manager listening to their team. So we've given the line manager the power to decide what the working pattern is, what days are in the office, what days aren't, how will it all work at distance, if it will and won't. That's been really decentralized to manager and team level to get that listening relationship. And then at corporate level, so that's working at sort of 10, 15,000 managers worldwide. When at corporate level, we've launched a huge, massive global scale questionnaire on hybrid work and really listened to what people's preferences are in terms of days per week, flexibility, what works for them, what doesn't. And we've tried to make no decision on our own in a little silo. Everything's been done by trying to hear from the ground upwards what's going to work for people and what's not.
It's such an important point, Alan and Inbal, and very much from the survey that we've done, we're already seeing disparity between the different groups and the tiers between what one expects versus the other. So that ability to really get your 360, really understand and get contribution and input to come through is super important, and it doesn't just sit at the leadership level. I think that's a really, really great point you're making. Kevin, is there anything you wanted to add on that around the business strategies, work strategies being considered or should be considered?
Absolutely. I mean, look, I think that we haven't spoken about this idea of a great reshuffle. It's kind of an extension of resignation, but it's this idea that people aren't just, checking out of the workforce. They're going to companies and they are a bit better aligned with what they are willing to do, put up with, to how they want to navigate these choppy waters of uncertainty right now with where we are in every economy. And I believe what's going to happen, I mean, you see these patterns every decade or so, right? Like you see HR policies, company cultures, it essentially try to keep up with expectations of the workforce, right? It used to be 20, 30 years ago, there's certain things that were said in the office. Today, it would just be blasphemy. It would be an HR policy, an HR incident just waiting to happen. So I think you have that going currently, where you've got an expectation by a workforce that hasn't necessarily been met quite yet by the corporate muscle, right? By the organizations that are needing to evolve a lot faster than they are prepared to. So that's why you're seeing this gap. Ultimately, what this is going to mean is every 3 to 5 years, you're going to see an extension of the menu of the types of companies that people will thrive at, right? And they will be a bit more parsed with how people want to live and conduct their lives and what their personal situation is. And that's a good thing. So that's where I think we're headed. I think it presents a wider range of managers and leaders. And I always come back to this question of identity. Like, I think that, the graduates of tomorrow They're going to have so many more choices of who they want to work for, why they are going to work for them, and how they are being met by this promise of, hey, come with us for a few years and you will do the best work of your life. And we will essentially partner with you on how you can change the world in your own particular way. I think the marketplace is going to go in that direction. At least I hope so.
Me too. I hope so too. Thanks, Kevin. Fantastic discussion. I wish we had more time, but we do not. I'm going to ask one final question. I'm going to invite Inbal to go first because I know you need to politely remove yourself to get on to your next coaching call. I'd like to ask everyone on the panel, last question, what can we do as business leaders to mitigate the wellbeing gap between ourselves and our people? There's some points shared as already, but is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
Awareness that this is happening, modeling the types of behaviors that managers want to see and encourage in their employees, and noticing who you're inviting to the table where information is gathered and decisions are being made.
Love it. Thank you, Inbal, and thank you for joining us. Kevin?
I think there needs to be just a very simply a posture of how can we lead in this space here? What's the right thing to do? How can we lead in our industry and in our space, right? Don't accept status quo. Don't accept, hey, listen, we're doing the best we can. Create the conversation. And obviously the messy middle, we've spoken about that before, but every one of us that has been associated with lead has a responsibility. We've seen the light, so to speak. So how can we elevate voices, inspire a conversation that previously did not exist, and challenge that status quo so that we can lead in the space, lead and ultimately in the world, right? But it starts with the space you're in.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kevin. Alan, final comment from the panel.
Yes, if I'm going to follow on from Inbal's use of 3 different words, I think I'm going to go with listening on the first one. Kevin's already mentioned it, but it's super important that as an organization and as managers that we're listening to the teams that we're working with, our employees, their needs. The second is going to be informing, and I think it's really important to be honest and open and transparent when we don't know things, but it's also really crucial that the information gets out there to everybody at all levels when we do. It goes back to what I was saying in the sort of sense of purpose and the meaning a moment ago. We need to be able to understand how our job links to the overall organization, and that can sometimes be distanced when we're working at distance. We don't perhaps see it so visibly when we're not working together. And then my last one is learning. I touched on it earlier. I think that we all need to really be focusing on learning, upskilling new skills for the future. May well be much more on soft skills as we move into the future of work. I think the soft skills have an increased importance as individuals, as human beings, as we're working together, that perhaps we've put on technical skills in the past. So if I was going to sum up, it's going to be listening, learning, and informing.
Fantastic. Really agree with all of those. And thank you very much, Alan, for joining us in your evening for France, Kevin, for joining us in your day, and Inbal for the fantastic discussion. Please, everyone, give your thanks and round of applause to this panel for their time. To close off, what I'd like to make sure I do is to also provide a few strategies or give you access of how you can look at strategies for supporting wellbeing. So as I mentioned, there was a white paper that was published as a result of this rigorous research that we did. We actually, with that review and meta-analysis, we informed what we now call the tenets of calm, which is confidence, adaptability, and links and motivation, which is an evidence-based actionable model, and it's created to help employees navigate wellbeing challenges in the hybrid future of work. So Alan's just talked about the need of soft skills and how we think about that. This is exactly what we're linking it into. What is the capabilities and the skills and the gaps that we're now seeing that's going to support the wellbeing of our team coming into it? So given that this year's theme at Me2We is connection, I just wanted to quickly touch on links, which is kind of around the idea of connection and why it's important. It's one of our core psychological needs, as we know. It's an evolutionary perspective, and humans did not thrive in isolation. And what we find as well is that when we feel excluded as humans, our brains process the pain in the same way as physical pain. So this is why this is super important when we think about that in the wellbeing context. There is a list of why there, which I'll let you look through. And then, of course, when we start to think about what those capabilities look like, this is how we look at it when we break it down. So if you're going, how do I talk about this with my people, my business? Literally, we have mapped out what are some of the skills and gaps that you can start to think about that helps to empower and arm your employees into their well-being coming through. I want to end on this note. As some of you may be aware, I'll be on campus on Wednesday. I'm going to link into our connection of theme that we've got, and I'll be running a session on purpose and how to design your purpose through Ikigai. So we're going to give back to ourselves and work through that on our theme of connection. But thank you to the committee, steering committee, for the fantastic organisation. Thank you to my panel, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you, Angela.